So without further ado, I would like to introduce Peter Mehlman and Erich Schwartzel.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Hey, thanks so much. Thanks for braving the rain tonight. Really great group of courageous Angelinos here. Peter and I were just talking in the room over there, and it turns out he is literally a card-carrying SAG-AFTRA member. He has his card on him right now. Yes. Yeah.
I have it in my money clip because I have, I don't want to go into this whole story, but I have a money clip that I got from Tiffany because I had a gift certificate and I couldn't find anything in the store like worth buying, and I got a money clip, and it's like the snobbiest money clip in the world. You have to keep like 30 bills in it at all time, or else it just doesn't, it just drops all over the place. So I keep my SAG card in there, and I think Amex, like, why do you need to know that? Okay.
Off to a great start.
Good night, folks.
So, yeah, exactly. So I am a journalist, and I am very intrigued by your early days as a journalist as well. You started at the Washington Post. Great newspaper, doing great work this past year. What were you covering when you were there?
I broke Watergate. That was me. No. I was doing a lot of sports, but I was like 21. I was just trying to get my name in the paper as much as possible. So I was in sports, but I was also like roaming around other sections trying to, get stories that I could do anywhere. Mm-hmm. I was covering school board meetings, and it was great. It was the most exciting place to show up to work every day. It was, I don't know.
And then tell us how you transitioned from that to writing more entertainment-focused work.
Well, that was a long transition because I moved back to New York in 1981, and I started working for Howard Cosell at ABC Sports, which was great. It was like being at the center of the sports universe, and he was the funniest guy in the world. I just loved him, and he was a hero of mine even as a kid. So it was really great. I met Donald Trump a bunch of times. Yeah? Yeah, back then I was up in his office, everything.
Why? What were you doing with him?
He owned the football team back then, so we did a lot of interviews with him, and I have small regrets about telling him to go into politics, but no, that was really great. And then, I got laid off after the '84 Olympics, and so because ABC blew all their money. But it was good. It was good to leave. I always think it's kind of good to get fired. I mean it. Kind of like sets you off in a better direction. I didn't really get fired. I got laid off. So then I just started. I started freelance magazine writing by accident. Because I wrote an article one day. I don't know what got into me, but I just wrote this article called "The We Just Broke Up Last Night Diet." It was, it covered like the first week of what you eat after you've been dumped.
What is on the menu?
Well, for me, it was always like I couldn't eat it all. Just like so much coffee and, and eggshells. And I don't know, I just wrote this diet, and I found some editor at Mademoiselle. No, I found an editor at Glamour. And she recommended me to an editor at Mademoiselle. And they published it. And I was like, wow, this is so much fun. I could stay home. I don't even have to show up anymore. So that's what I did until Seinfeld.
But it was one of those essays, one of those freelance essays you had done that got the attention whenever they were creating Seinfeld, right?
Yeah. Well, I moved out here in '89 just to kind of change my life a little bit. I loved LA. There, when I was here for a month during the Olympics, and I just loved LA, and I was out here still freelance magazine writing, and I bumped into Larry David, who I had met literally twice in New York. And the key words are bumped into, because, it's all luck. I mean, everything's just luck.
Where were you? Were you walking down the street?
I was on Melrose near the Improv. And I just bumped into him, and we were talking. He goes, I'm doing this little TV show with Jerry Seinfeld. Maybe you could write a script. And so I had to give in a writing sample, and God, breakups is going to be like a big theme here. He asked for a writing sample that he could pass to Jerry, and I had written this article about this day I had spent in New York after a breakup, where I thought I spotted a celebrity in the street, newscaster. And when I got close, it wasn't him. And my friends and I were amazing at spotting celebrities on the streets of New York. I mean, like obscure ones, too. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure you could be an obscure celebrity, but whatever. So I was so annoyed that I got it wrong, that I spent the entire day. I wasn't too grounded on planning solo weekends, after the breakup. So I thought I'd spend the entire day walking around the city and I'll only go home if I spot a celebrity. So I did the entire day.
Which celebrity ended up breaking the fast?
Edwin Newman. You wouldn't even know him. He was a huge newscaster in the 60s and 70s, and he wrote these books about grammar. He was great. But, it was mainly just that was the structure, and there was a lot of digressions about life and love in New York. Mm-hmm. And that's the article I gave to Larry, and he passed it on to Jerry, and I got to write a script, and next thing you know, I was like unbelievably loaded.
When you're a journalist, when you're a writer, you're constantly looking, the currency that you have is stories, right? I'm always, as someone who works at a newspaper, I'm constantly thinking, what's the story? What's my next story? You had to sort of pivot from that to looking inward for the story.
Yeah, that was a really tough transition. Like you say, as a journalist, you're always looking out at the world. I think as an actor, you're kind of looking out at the world, too. But as a writer, especially for a show like Seinfeld, where Larry got so many of his ideas from his own thoughts that, I tried to emulate that. And so I became very, very aware of all of my smallest thoughts. All the things that, I tried to get this mechanism where the kind of thoughts that go in and out of your mind didn't go out, like a safety net. And, I did okay with that for the first 2 or 3 years of the show, and then it was just going a little overboard.
You couldn't turn it off?
No. I'll tell the story really quickly. In '94, after the earthquake, our stage was trashed. So the season lasted an extra month and a half, and it was really exhausting. And so afterwards, I just wanted to get away, and somebody suggested this place, Canyon Ranch. I didn't know what it was, but it sounded good, and I just booked it without looking at the prices or anything loony. The first thing I see is Courtney Love being held up by two people. She was drying out there. I was like, what did I get myself into here? Anyway, I just as a little side note, the first day that I was there, I spent the entire day watching NBA playoff games at a health spa at $500 a night or whatever it was. The second day, I went on one little hike, and it was awful, and all these people were talking about, health and exercise. And then, so boring. And, and then I found this small group of smokers. So I started hanging out with them. So, like for the first like $800, I watched NBA playoff games and took up smoking at a health club, at a health spa. Anyway, it also happened to be Mother's Day weekend. And I met there were a lot of mothers and daughters there. And I met one of the daughters, and one of the first things she told me is that, God, I hate my mother, please, just, it was like, okay. And so we were hanging out the whole time, and at a certain point we started making out a little bit, and I was thinking to myself, wow, it's so amazing how every girl's got her own little kissing system. Hand here, man, here, and all of a sudden
Thinking of this while it's happening.
While it's happening. I mean, suddenly when I was thinking, like, if I'm not in the moment for this, something's wrong. Long-winded story for a little point, but...
Well, then, what changed after that? Did anything change after that?
I don't know. I think I just tried to back off it a little bit. Like I was reading more, just getting outward a little bit.
Well, you were working with four at one point then, very famous actors, and I know we probably have a lot of actors in the room. Can you talk about developing those characters and then writing for those characters once they became characters with a capital C?
It was very hard to develop them because they were so great at developing themselves. You never wrote a line for Seinfeld, or especially for Julia, and it never turned out like it sounded in your head when she delivered it. Of course, she did it 20 times better than you did. So, the characters kind of, I wasn't one of the writers on the staff who really expanded the characters, because I actually was more the person who was devoted to the original image, the original conception of the show. Really small stories, tiny slices of life. I wasn't into Puerto Rican day parades and frogs or whatever was going on inside the car, or salads, or I was into really, really small stories.
Very low stakes.
No, not necessarily low stakes, just very slice of lifey stuff. I didn't write big stories. The last script I did was Yada Yada, and that's a small little thing. It's just like a little point of, just a little bit of usage that people have.
Do you remember when you noticed whenever the safety net in your brain caught Yada Yada?
This is strange. I actually remembered from like 10 years earlier, I had a meeting with an editor in New York, an editor from, I think, Self magazine. And she said, yada, yada. And I remember thinking, oh, that's a funny expression. And I never heard it again. And I just, somehow it popped into my head. And I was thinking, if you say yada, yada, it could like gloss over any number of sins. People just go, yeah, yada, 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 and, so, that was a real stroke of luck. That popped into my head. Ideas, it's so important just to keep your mind open for business at the same time, like The Sponge just happened because I heard it on the radio that they were going out of business. And I was thinking, wow, if Elaine's a Sponge user, she would probably try to buy out the entire West Side, but she'd only get a limited number, and then she'd have to change her entire screening process for who she sleeps with. Like one thought, literally, I heard it on the radio in one thought. That's your gift from God if you're doing that job.
So
it happened to Larry like every other day,
So tell us a little bit then about, so if you were writing for them and then you'd hear them do the line and it would be 20 times better, was there a rehearsal process? What was the collaboration like between writer and actor?
Not that much as far as line readings and things like that. Once in a while, Julia or Jason might say, I don't know what to do with this line. And I would pretty much assume at that point that it was the line was the problem, not them. I had a line in The Sponge where Julia goes, "Oh my God, are you kidding? I'm a spermicidal maniac." And it sounds funny, and maybe I should have given her that line reading. But she couldn't seem to make it work. And I just said, okay, then the line's not good.
Gonna get rid of it.
Because, you know, her line readings are like off the charts.
Well, I'm interested in what you make of the fact that we've seen so many examples of Seinfeld's relevance today. There's this brilliant Twitter account, Modern Seinfeld, that imagines what Seinfeld writers would be writing about in present day America. There's a book out, Seinfeldia, that sort of like the cultural history of Seinfeld. Why do you think it's resonated, but then it seems like in just the past year and a half, been particularly relevant?
I gotta say, it's like a huge mystery. I mean, you know, part of what, you know, like what I was saying, that the tiny slices of life, that's the great thing about the show, because it is eternal in that way, because those problems still arise. Also, another thing is that, you know, these characters are always trying to create a perfect world. You know, they're trying to do the roommate switch, or, you know, they were constantly trying to make the world perfect and never succeeding. And I think, you know, things are even worse than they've ever been now. I mean, you know, we're so far away from any kind of perfection now, and I don't know. I'm not exactly sure why it keeps going on, but I think the stories are still relatable. And parents are just, you know, they have their like 10-year-old kids watching the show. Thank God.
Do you think that are there any particular shows or creators or comedians you think have picked up the torch of noticing the mundane, noticing the everyday?
I gotta say I don't. I mean, and I'm not saying that critically. I don't watch many comedies on TV. Comedy seems to be lagging behind drama. Am I right? I mean, the dramas seem like they're so incredible, and I don't know what's really good in comedy. You know, there's something, like when I started pitching shows after Seinfeld, I realized that network executives hated the show.
What hated Seinfeld?
Yes, they liked it as fans, but they hated it because it broke all their rules. You know, the characters weren't likable, and you know, and they screwed each other over as friends nonstop. And you know, they really hated that. They resented it. You know, like one of the first notes I got on the first show I did was, the character seems a little glib. And I said, well, I told him to do the character glib. You know, and you know, it's just a, you know, Seinfeld was like a weird anomaly. You know, they just, I always think that a really good show that fails, that is not an example of a show falling through the cracks. When a really great show succeeds, that's when it's fallen through the cracks.
So let's go chronologically then. So after you leave Seinfeld, take us after you leave there. What comes next, and sort of what gets you to the novel and the stand-up career today?
I wouldn't call it a career.
Okay. Hobby?
I've been doing it for about a year, and I've made $115. So that's not really, you know, I mean.
That's what's in your Tiffany's billfold?
That's what, you know, the Uber back home cost, you know. After Seinfeld, I did, you know, I was with DreamWorks, and I did the show called It's Like You Know with Jennifer Grey and A.J. Langer and Chris Eigeman. And it was really incredible. It was a great time. It lasted 2 seasons. It kind of makes you realize how the magic of a show like Seinfeld, how unlikely it is. You know, like our cast didn't exactly get along great. I wasn't allowed to use Andy Ackerman. ABC would not let me use him because he shot the pilot, and they felt like he and I were too much of a united front against each other. You know, like it's a war. It was, you know, it was an unbelievable experience, and it didn't go the distance, but it was great.
So then the book called It Won't Always Be This Great, that came out, when, in 2012? Is that right?
I think 13. Yeah, that was, I don't know, I just started writing. I just had this idea, and I just had this, like, one thought of somebody telling a story to somebody who's in a coma. Because, you know, like, you're supposed to talk to the coma victim. And I was thinking, like, that's kind of an interesting way of telling something but not really telling it.
Like you could get a lot off your chest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and, you know, it's like a therapist where, you know, who's not answering back. Who's not contesting anything you say. And I don't know, I was like 30 pages in before I even knew I was writing a novel. But it was so much fun to write. I just, you know, I'm not a disciplined writer, but I discipline myself by saying, okay, you just have to make a little progress every day, even if it's just a paragraph. And usually, if you do that, you're going to write more than a paragraph. Hopefully.
Did you have anything more to the process? Like to the actual writing process
No, I just kept I just kept following the story. There's that kind of driving at night theory of writing a novel or writing anything, that you can go as far as your headlights and eventually get to where you want to go. And that's how I did it.
So then tell me about the stand-up that you've been doing. How did you arrive at that, and what was it like to take that up rather than be the one supplying the jokes?
I met this young stand-up comic, and she was working at a charity thing that I went to. And we just got to talking, and I was like interested because she did stand-up, and I was like interested that these people, how many people seem to be doing it now, and like what the odds are of having a career. And I was kind of grilling her about it, back to the journalism mode. And she says, well, you should try it. I host a show at the West Side Comedy Theater. So I said, for years I had an opening line if I had ever done stand-up. So I decided, what the hell, I'd try it.
What was the opening line?
Shocking that you'd ask. I always come out and just kind of look around, and then I go, I guess most of you know me as the guy who impregnated Roe from Roe v. Wade. And then I say, look, I said to her, look, you're pregnant, you don't want to have the baby, you don't have to make a federal case out of it. So I just had that lying around, so I figured I'd build on that. That's really all I had.
How did you go from there?
I looked through my notes. I have this list of these pages and pages of compulsive jottings, and I just took a day to really go through them and think what might work in stand up or something like that. It's funny because 90% of the things I had the first time are all gone. I still use that first line, but the first time I did stand up, like none of it is left. None of what I did then.
How did you edit it?
this was something I learned from Jerry, that, you could always do better. And, I think this whole town sometimes has a bad case of first thought-itis. You have a first thought and you get so married to it that no matter how many, you don't try to do better. And I'm very aware of that. That's one of Jerry's really great parts of his stand-up, is that he is so meticulous about it, and he does it, and he makes it so. He always makes jokes better and lines better, and so I just kept adding and subtracting and adding and subtracting.
No, not to put you on the spot, can you give us an example of something that you made better?
No. I don't know if I made better. I just kind of like, you make things better more from subtraction than addition sometimes, It's just taking out things, I was talking about how, one thing I was talking about how I was troubled by certain things happening in the world, and I realized that I wasn't kind of following up on what I did as far as to make myself not be less troubled. So I came up with this thing about how, I went to the Grand Canyon to get a little perspective. And I was sitting over the rim of the Grand Canyon looking out over this vast, vast expanse, billions of years in the making. And I realized that my problems are so much more important than everyone else's. I'm really happy with that joke. I love that one.
So how often are you performing now?
Well, that's the problem. You actually have to, pursue this. And, I have a few people, like a coterie of maybe 3 comedians or people that, ask me to do things, but I don't hustle yet. I just don't feel like at this point in my life I should have to put, effort into things. But, I have to do it. Sometimes I get very inspired. If I see Sarah Silverman on TV, one of her specials, I get totally inspired because I think she's an absolute genius. Suddenly I have all these opinions about comedians,
Well, on that hopeful note, I think we do have to wrap it up. So thank you very much for
Thanks so much. This was really